Haley Morgan told her parents she'd been accepted into a prestigious summer marine biology program. Ethan Marsh, the quiet, charismatic college mentor who helped her apply, seemed trustworthy enough until she vanished without a trace. What began as a proud farewell quickly spiraled into a chilling mystery that would haunt a small Massachusetts town for years. Behind the promise of opportunity lay secrets, manipulation, and a hidden trail leading deep into the wilderness, where the truth about Haley's disappearance would prove far more disturbing than anyone imagined. 17-year-old Haley Morgan had always been the kind of person people described as put together. She earned straight A's, volunteered at the local aquarium, and kept a meticulous journal filled with facts about marine life. Her dream was to study oceanography at Stanford, and she was doing everything she could to make that dream a reality. That's why no one questioned it when, in early June of 2017, she announced she had been accepted into a prestigious summer program for aspiring marine biologists. She said it was hosted by a small research institute on the coast of Maine. According to her, only a handful of students were accepted each year, and she had received one of the coveted spots. Her parents were thrilled. They congratulated her and helped her pack. She showed them an email that looked official enough. It had a logo, details about the program's dates, and a note saying that phones would be taken upon arrival to encourage students to disconnect and focus on their studies. It all seemed legitimate. Haley had never given them a reason to doubt her, so they didn't. On the morning of June 12th, she said goodbye, boarded a Greyhound bus heading east, and vanished into the flow of summer travelers. She was dressed in her usual hoodie and jeans, carrying a worn-out backpack and a small suitcase. She promised she'd write when she could. Weeks went by. At first, her parents didn't worry. The program was supposed to be intense, and if phones weren't allowed, they figured she might not have access to one. But as the days turned into 2 weeks, then 3, unease began to settle in. There were no postcards, no emails, not even a call from the program's director. When Haley's mother tried to reply to the acceptance email, it bounced back as undeliverable. That was when the first cracks appeared. By the end of June, her parents went to the local police and reported her missing. The investigation started, off slow. Haley was 17, just shy of being a legal adult, so there was still hope she had left by choice and was simply unreachable. But the more the police looked into her story, the more things began to unravel. The prestigious summer program had no online presence, no website, and no mention in any academic circles. The institute named in the forged letter didn't exist. The email address was a generic one, hosted on a free platform, and traced back to an IP address registered through a masking service. In other words, it was completely untraceable. Someone had created a believable fantasy, and Haley had bought into it. Security footage from the bus station showed her arriving on June 12th, just like she told her family. She boarded the bus alone. Her ticket was one way, purchased in cash, 2 days earlier. Investigators tracked the bus route and interviewed drivers and passengers. One driver remembered Haley because she asked detailed questions about connecting routes and mentioned she was heading to Maine for a science thing. But after she got off the bus in Boston, she disappeared. There were no further records of her purchasing another ticket, no surveillance footage of her at nearby stations. She had simply vanished into the city. Her parents were devastated. They kept hoping that Haley would call or send a letter, or that it was all a misunderstanding and she'd walk back through the front door one day. But the weeks stretched into months and no answers came. Friends at school were stunned. Haley wasn't the kind of girl who partied or rebelled. She didn't even have a boyfriend. Her idea of fun was studying tide pools or watching documentaries about coral bleaching. Her teachers described her as focused, determined, and polite. Her sudden disappearance made no sense to anyone. By the end of the summer, the police had run out of leads. No phone records, no bank activity, no social media logins. It was as if Haley had fallen off the face of the earth. Her laptop had been left behind, but much of her search history had been wiped. Investigators found only fragments, searches, about coastal towns in Maine, marine science scholarships, and how to travel anonymously. That last one was the most disturbing. It suggested that, at least in part, Haley had planned to disappear. But the question was why. Her parents insisted that she would never willingly leave without saying something. They believed someone had manipulated her, lured her away under false pretenses. The idea of their daughter sitting in a dark room waiting for help that never came haunted them. Yet there was no evidence of foul play, no ransom notes, no threats. Just an empty space where their daughter used to be. Media interest in the case was modest at first. Another missing teenager. Another unsolved mystery. But as the strange details emerged, the fake summer program, the wiped digital trail, the bus ride to nowhere, people began to pay more attention. Internet forums lit up with theories. Some believed Haley had run away to escape the pressure of success. Others were convinced she had been groomed online. A few thought she had joined a cult or been taken by someone who promised her a future in marine science. All of it was speculation. None of it brought her home. The story of Haley Morgan faded from the headlines, but not from the minds of those closest to her. Her parents kept her room exactly as she had left it. A pair of glasses sat on the desk. Her journal, filled with scientific sketches and ocean facts, remained open to a page about the migratory patterns of blue whales. It was the last entry she had written. In it, she had underlined one sentence 3 times. Some species travel thousands of miles to find what they need, guided only by instinct and the pull of something unseen. Her parents reread that line often. They wondered if it was a clue, a message, or just a reflection of how much she loved the sea. They didn't know. And as the seasons changed and the years passed, the only certainty was the silence. Haley Morgan was gone, and no one knew why. When investigators began digging into Haley Morgan's disappearance, they were immediately struck by how little she had left behind. There was no clear destination, no known contacts in Maine, and no digital footprint pointing to where she might have gone. Her cell phone had been turned off the same day she boarded the bus, and her bank account hadn't been touched since. With no concrete leads from surveillance footage or eyewitness accounts, police turned to the one place people often reveal their secrets without realizing it: her computer. Haley's laptop had been left on her desk, neatly closed and unplugged. At first glance, there didn't seem to be much. There were a few documents related to school, some college application essays, and a folder filled with pictures of sea creatures and tide charts. But investigators quickly noticed that her browser history had been almost entirely wiped. No social media logins, no saved passwords, and only a few remaining tabs, all seemingly benign. It looked deliberate, like someone had gone through the machine and scrubbed it clean. But digital forensics is a persistent science. Specialists were able to recover fragments of deleted data, small pieces that had been missed during the cleanup. And what they found started to change the entire direction of the investigation. Over the last several months before her disappearance, Haley had been frequenting a number of obscure online forums. Most were centered around marine biology and environmental science, but hidden among them were threads discussing survival techniques, remote living, and how to erase digital footprints. More concerning were her visits to anonymous chat rooms, places where users didn't use real names, where no login was required, and where people could pretend to be anyone. One name showed up repeatedly: Ocean Eyes 84. In one recovered chat log, Haley had exchanged messages with this user, talking about her dreams of working in ocean conservation and how trapped she felt in her small town. The messages were friendly at first, even encouraging. Ocean Eyes 84 complimented her intelligence, told her she had potential, and slowly started suggesting that maybe she didn't need to wait for college to begin her real life. There were mentions of a group that lived off the grid, a community of thinkers and researchers doing things outside the system. Haley asked questions, carefully at first, but with growing interest. Eventually, she began asking about how someone could disappear, how they could live without ID, without money, and without being found. She asked about creating fake documents. She asked about travel. She asked if people had really done it before. Each time, Ocean Eyes 84 reassured her, yes, it could be done, and yes, she had what it took. Investigators were alarmed. It was clear Haley had been groomed. Slowly, methodically, someone had gotten into her head, feeding into her ambition and her sense of isolation. But who was behind the username? It took weeks, but authorities traced Ocean Eyes 84 to an IP address in Portland, Maine. It was registered to a man named Ethan Marsh, a 34-year-old marine mechanic who lived alone in a small apartment near the harbor. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, and no connection to Haley's family. But when they searched his online history, the puzzle pieces began to fit together. Marsh had posed as a mentor on several online platforms. He would identify intelligent, curious young people, usually girls, and build relationships with them over time. In many cases, he claimed to be a researcher or scientist, offering advice, encouragement, and eventually, ways to escape their lives. His messages were never explicitly threatening, but they had an undertone of control. He always steered the conversation toward isolation, cutting ties, moving away, starting over. When questioned, Marsh admitted he had spoken with Haley online, but denied ever meeting her in person. He said they had chatted about marine biology, and that she had been enthusiastic, but he claimed she had stopped responding weeks before her disappearance. His laptop was seized, and while many of the chats had been deleted, digital forensics confirmed that he had been in regular contact with Haley until at least 3 days before she left home. Despite the suspicious behavior, there was no physical evidence linking him to her disappearance. No fingerprints, no surveillance footage, no witnesses placing them together. Without something concrete, the police had no grounds to hold him. Marsh was released, though he remained under watch. Public outrage followed. Haley's story began to spread online, fueled by the chilling details of a young girl possibly manipulated into vanishing by a man twice her age. Her photo appeared in news articles and internet posts. Missing persons groups shared her story in hopes of reaching someone who might recognize her or remember something. But the case stalled again. Investigators went back to the chat logs, trying to find anything they might have missed. One conversation stood out. Haley had mentioned she didn't want to go to college right away. She said she wanted to see the ocean for real, not just in books. She talked about finding a place where she could belong, where people understood her, She wrote about the pressure she felt to be perfect, how it felt like everyone expected her to succeed and never make a mistake. In those late-night chats, she had confessed things she never told her family or friends. It became increasingly clear that Haley hadn't just run away, she had been searching for something. Maybe escape, maybe freedom, maybe connection. But the person guiding her toward it was dangerous. The FBI briefly got involved, considering whether Marsh's actions fell under federal grooming or exploitation statutes. But again, the lack of physical evidence made prosecution difficult. He had been careful, too careful. By the time they gathered enough data to potentially charge him, he had vanished. His apartment was found empty, stripped bare. Neighbors said he had moved out in the middle of the night. Once again, the trail went cold. Back in Ohio, Haley's parents tried to make sense of what they were learning. The daughter they thought they knew had been carrying a second life online, one filled with people and conversations they never saw coming. It was a painful realization, made worse by the knowledge that someone had taken advantage of her openness and intelligence. Her room remained untouched, her bed neatly made. Her aquarium, home to a single shy goldfish, still bubbled softly in the background. On her nightstand sat a book on jellyfish migration, its pages worn from use. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of violence, just a bright, hopeful teenager who had believed in a future that never arrived, and somewhere out there, a man who knew more than he was willing to say. In late July 2018, over a year after Haley Morgan vanished without, a pair of hikers, stumbled upon something unusual in the dense woods of northern New Hampshire. They had been following a rarely used trail near the White Mountains when they noticed an old van hidden behind a thick curtain of pine trees. The vehicle was partially obscured by branches and covered in a layer of dirt and leaves, as if it had been there for months. The hikers, curious and unsettled, called the local sheriff's office to report the discovery. Deputies arrived later that day and found the van locked, but abandoned. The license plates had been removed, and there were no identifying stickers or registration numbers. It looked like someone had gone out of their way to make it invisible. Inside, the vehicle smelled musty, like damp fabric and mold. There were empty water bottles, granola wrappers, and an old sleeping bag laid across the back seat. A half-empty duffel bag held a change of clothes, a flashlight, and a small paperback on marine ecosystems. What caught the deputies' attention most, however, was a spiral-bound notebook sitting on the passenger seat. The notebook was weathered and stained, its cover torn at the edges. Inside were pages filled with carefully drawn sketches of fish, seaweed, whales, and jellyfish. Some of the sketches were labeled with scientific names, others were purely artistic. But it was a name written on one of the final pages that made the deputies stop. Haley M. The notebook was sent for analysis, and within days, fingerprints confirmed that it belonged to Haley Morgan. After over a year of dead ends, this was the first tangible sign that she had still been alive after her disappearance. Investigators believed she had lived in the van for some time, possibly weeks, maybe longer, but there were no signs of violence or injury, no blood, no struggle. The scene was eerily calm, almost as if she had simply walked away one day and never returned. The van itself was a mystery. No registration, no VIN numbers visible. The vehicle identification number had been scratched off, which meant someone had taken steps to make it untraceable. It was determined to be a 1996 Dodge, likely purchased second-hand and paid for in cash. Investigators broadened the search area and combed the nearby woods for more clues. Roughly 100 yards away, hidden beneath a pile of leaves and brush, searchers found something strange, a large blue plastic cooler buried under a thin layer of soil. Inside were dozens of empty energy bar wrappers, cans of tuna, and plastic utensils. More disturbing was what they found next to the cooler: a prepaid burner phone, battery removed, and a folded map of the East Coast with small red circles drawn along the shoreline. The map spanned from Massachusetts all the way to Nova Scotia. One of the circles was near Bar Harbor, Maine. Another was in coastal Nova Scotia. Several were near unmarked spots in remote regions. There was no indication of who drew the map or when, but the presence of the burner phone raised new concerns. Someone had been helping her, or at the very least, someone had been with her. Haley hadn't driven. She didn't have a license or access to a car. That van, and everything in it, had to come from someone else. News of the discovery reignited media attention. For the first time in over a year, there was fresh hope and fresh fear. People speculated wildly. Had she been living in hiding? Had she joined a cult or been taken in by a fringe group living off the grid? Others wondered if she had been running from something or someone, and if her disappearance was entirely voluntary. Her parents traveled to New Hampshire to see the van. They confirmed some of the items inside had belonged to Haley: a t-shirt from a high school field trip, a pair of hiking boots she bought months before she left. But they couldn't answer the one question that mattered most. Why would their daughter be living in the woods? The van was towed and examined in forensic labs. No foreign DNA was found. No signs of Ethan Marsh, the man suspected of luring Haley away in the first place. But a few strands of hair found in the sleeping bag were sent off for testing, and they came back with a surprising result. They weren't Haley's. They belonged to an unidentified female, possibly in her 20s. This raised new questions. Who had been with her? Was Haley traveling with another girl? Or had someone else used the van after she left it behind? Months passed with no new developments. The van was analyzed again and again, but the results were always inconclusive. The fingerprint evidence confirmed Haley had been there. The drawings in the notebook matched her handwriting. But no one could say what had happened to her after she left that wooded site. In the meantime, authorities began looking into other disappearances in the region. Young women who had gone missing under similarly mysterious circumstances. Most had no direct connection to Haley, but one case stood out. In the spring of 2017, 2 months before Haley vanished, a 20-year-old named Marissa Doyle disappeared from a bus station in Boston. Like Haley, she had told her family she was attending a marine biology program. Her case had gone largely unnoticed, until Haley's story gained attention. Investigators began to suspect a pattern. With both women last seen in the Boston area, and both connected to marine biology programs that didn't exist, the idea of a coordinated recruitment or manipulation effort gained traction. Was someone preying on bright, science-minded young women with dreams of escape? The FBI reopened Haley's case with this in mind, though no further connections could be proved. The most unsettling possibility remained that Haley had wanted to disappear, and had succeeded. That the van had been a temporary stop in a larger, carefully planned journey. That the circles on the map were locations she intended to visit, or places she had already seen. That she was out there somewhere, moving from place to place, staying, hidden on purpose. But her parents refused to believe she would cut them off so completely. Not without reason, not without a word. They believed something had happened to her, or that someone had convinced her the only way to achieve her dream was to leave everything and everyone behind. The van was eventually stored as evidence, and the woods returned to their quiet state. No more signs were found, no more messages. Just a decaying vehicle and a notebook full of ocean creatures, floating in a space between reality and mystery. Haley had been there. That much was finally known. But whether she had left of her own free will or been taken once again, no one could say. And wherever she had gone next, she had left behind no trail. Nearly 2 years after Haley Morgan's disappearance, the investigation had grown colder than ever. No sightings, no confirmed communications, no further physical evidence. Her family had cycled through every emotion imaginable: grief, hope, disbelief, rage, until numbness took over. The van discovery had felt like a breakthrough, but it led only to more questions. In the minds of many, the case was quietly becoming one of those unsolved stories that fade into whispers, a mystery left to linger in late-night forums and true crime blogs. But something changed in early 2020 when a forest fire broke out near Kennebunkport, Maine. The blaze scorched a large swath of wooded land bordering an old coastal highway. In the aftermath, fire crews surveying the area found what remained of a small cabin nestled deep in the trees. It was barely more than a shack, constructed from scrap wood, covered in tarp, and hidden under the canopy. The fire hadn't destroyed it completely. The foundation and several charred walls remained intact. Inside, investigators found evidence that someone had been living there recently. The structure had no plumbing or electricity, but there were signs of occupancy: an extinguished fire pit, a sleeping area made from blankets and foam, and a collection of stored canned food. Along the scorched wall, there was a laminated poster of a coral reef tacked up with nails. In the ashes, partially protected from the flames under a metal box, were journals, 4 of them. The pages were smoke-stained and brittle, but many entries were still legible. The journals were written in a tidy, distinctive hand. The content confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Haley Morgan had not only disappeared, she had built a new life for herself, in fragments, in silence, in exile. The early entries were filled with wonder and idealism. She wrote about wanting to live freely, away from pressure, expectations, and judgment. She described long hikes to the coast, watching tides, and studying marine birds. But the tone changed. Slowly. Later entries grew darker, lonelier. She mentioned isolation, uncertainty, fear of being followed. There were references to someone she called E, never a full name, but the context suggested it was Ethan Marsh. The entries hinted at a strained relationship. At first, she described E as a mentor, someone who helped her get started, who showed her where to go and how to survive.
But over time, the dynamic appeared to shift. She wrote about feeling watched, controlled. She hinted that E had taken her phone, discouraged her from writing, and moved her to different locations often. She wasn't sure why. One passage
read, "I don't know if I chose this anymore. I thought I did. But maybe I just didn't understand what I was choosing." She began to question her freedom. She described arguing with E, wanting to leave and not being allowed. In one chilling entry she wrote, "If I disappear again, it's because I tried to leave. If someone finds this, I didn't walk away twice." That line triggered immediate alarm. It indicated she may have been in danger far beyond what anyone had previously considered. Search teams combed the area around the cabin. They found boot prints leading away from the site toward the highway, but lost the trail near a gravel pull-off. No new evidence emerged. The last journal entry was dated December 19, 2019, just 3 weeks before the fire. It was brief, just one sentence. "I think I'm almost ready to go." Whether that meant leaving E, returning home, or something else entirely remained unknown. Investigators reopened every thread of the case, focusing again on Ethan Marsh. He hadn't been seen since 2018. His apartment in Portland remained empty, and his online presence had vanished. Financial records were non-existent. No bank account activity, no credit cards. It was as if he had never existed. But he had. And now there was stronger evidence than ever that he had played a direct role in Haley's disappearance and whatever had happened after. The FBI classified him as a fugitive and issued a warrant under federal kidnapping statutes, citing the manipulation and control detailed in the journals. They believed he had orchestrated Haley's movements, isolated her from the world, and possibly moved other young women in similar patterns. His online aliases were tracked back years, with at least 4 different screen names identified as possibly his. All had been active in chat rooms with similar targets, young, intelligent girls with scientific interests and troubled family ties. The idea that Haley had lived under his control for months or even years was devastating. Her family, previously, torn between hope and grief, now had to face the possibility that their daughter had not simply vanished, but been held against her will. Worse, they still had no idea what had become of her after that final entry. Forensic teams analyzed the journals for fingerprints, hair samples, anything. They did find partial prints belonging to Haley, but also 2 sets that couldn't be matched in any criminal database. One of them was believed to belong to Marsh. The other remained unknown. Investigators speculated that perhaps Haley had met someone else in the woods, someone who helped her, or someone who hurt her, with no body, no confirmed sightings, and no suspect in custody. The case remained maddeningly incomplete. A life glimpsed only in fragments, a chat log, a van in the woods, a drawing in a notebook, a sentence in a journal. Haley had become a ghost, present only in pieces, each one painting a different story. Was she still alive? Perhaps finally free? Had she escaped not just her captor, but the very identity the world had placed on her, or had she tried to run and failed? As media outlets picked up the story again, tips began flooding in. People claimed to have seen Haley in Vermont, in Nova Scotia, even as far as British Columbia. None of the leads panned out. Some were sincere, but mistaken. Others were cruel hoaxes. Each one drained the family a little more. Yet they couldn't give up. Not when they knew now that she had tried to survive, tried to escape, tried to be more than a missing person poster. Authorities began investigating wilderness communities, up and down the East Coast, places where people lived off the grid, shunning government oversight. None offered any real clues. Haley had never used her Social Security number. She had never tried to reach out to her family, at least not through traceable means. But she had written her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. She had left behind a voice, quiet, buried, almost lost, but still hers. And somewhere beyond the pages of her journals, a final chapter was waiting. Whether it would be one of return, resolution, or tragedy, no one yet knew. In the spring of 2021, as the world slowly emerged from the grip of the pandemic, a strange package arrived at the Morgan family home in Massachusetts. It was unmarked, wrapped in plain brown paper with no return address. Inside was a small, wooden box containing a single flash drive, a folded piece of nautical charting paper with faded ink marks, and a Polaroid photo. The picture showed a girl standing at the edge of a rocky shoreline, staring out at the ocean. Her back was to the camera, but her dark hair, slim frame, and posture bore a striking resemblance to Haley. The timestamp on the image read January 6, 2021, and the location coordinates, scrawled in ballpoint pen on the back, pointed to a remote section of Nova Scotia's southern coast. Shocked and trembling, her parents turned the flash drive over to authorities. The FBI examined it immediately and found several files, short video clips, voice recordings, and what appeared to be a long unsent letter. The letter was written in a Word document simply titled, "To anyone who's still looking." The author never signed her name, but the tone, writing style, and references matched Haley's known voice from the journals. The content was raw, unfiltered, and painful. She wrote about years spent moving between coastal hideouts, learning to live unnoticed. She explained how the promise of the summer program had lured her away from everything she knew, and how quickly that turned into something she hadn't expected. She described being isolated, having her decisions shaped for her, losing her sense of what was real and what was constructed. She said that for a long time she convinced herself she had chosen her path, but she eventually saw it for what it was, a slow erasure of identity, a disappearance not just from the world, but from herself. She mentioned E again, though, never by name. She alluded to manipulation, to being moved when she asked questions, to being cut off from outside communication. She said it took her years to unlearn the voice in her head that wasn't hers. And when she finally left, she did so alone, in the middle of the night, with only a backpack and a plan to head north. She described the cabin found after the fire as one of many temporary homes. She had lived in shacks, tents, vans, and once, a boathouse on the edge of a fishing village. The cold didn't bother her. The solitude was harder. But what truly haunted her was the guilt. Guilt for disappearing, for not calling, for becoming a mystery that hurt so many people. The videos were short and blurry. In one, she filmed her hands turning the pages of a tide chart. In another, she panned across a foggy shoreline, the waves crashing in the distance. Her voice could be heard faintly in the background, narrating thoughts, mostly fragmented. "This is where I feel least invisible," she said in one. "Like something could find me and I'd still be whole." What made the material so compelling wasn't just the proof of life. It was the tone of someone who had finally taken control. She didn't ask to be rescued. She didn't explain everything. But she wanted people to know. She was alive. She had survived, and she had made her choice. Still, for law enforcement, the questions multiplied. Who sent the package? If Haley had done it herself, why now? And why anonymously? Why give just enough information to confirm she was out there, but not enough to be found? The coordinates from the photo led a small team to a rugged part of Nova Scotia's coastline. They found the exact rock ledge from the picture, but no sign of recent habitation. Locals in a nearby town said they had seen a quiet young woman, over the winter, renting a room above an old bookstore, paying in cash. She'd left in early February, leaving behind only a few items: a pair of hiking boots, a torn field guide to coastal flora, and a sealed envelope addressed to no one in particular. Inside the envelope was a single sentence: "I still dream of the reef sometimes." That phrase echoed one of the last entries in her journal before the cabin fire, suggesting she had indeed stayed there after escaping E. But no further sightings followed. It was as if Haley had surfaced briefly, just long enough to let the world know she wasn't lost anymore, only gone. Her family, upon learning this, experienced a whirlwind of emotion. Relief that she was alive. Sorrow that she had chosen not to return. A strange pride that she had endured, grown strong, and reclaimed herself in her own way. But always, the ache of not knowing where she was, whether she was safe, whether they'd ever see her again. The FBI officially reclassified the case in late 2021. Haley Morgan was no longer listed as missing. Her status became located, declined, recovery. Ethically, without evidence of a crime still in progress or signs of immediate danger, they could not force an adult to return to a life she had chosen to leave behind. Still, they kept the warrant open for Ethan Marsh, whose influence had started it all. He remained at large, his trail cold, his identity almost mythic, but the damage he left behind was all too real. Online, Haley's story took on a life of its own. True crime channels speculated endlessly. Some believed she was hiding from something darker than anyone knew. Others suggested she had joined a secretive eco-commune or was building a life off-grid. A few insisted she was planning to resurface someday with a book, a documentary, a message. But none of it was confirmed. What remained were fragments, a photograph, a flash drive, a notebook in a van, a sentence in a burned journal. Together they formed a ghost map, a life charted not by cities and schools, but by tides, trees, and time. A girl who walked away once, then again, and perhaps again. To this day, no one has seen Haley Morgan in person since 2017. Her disappearance began as a lie. I got into a summer program, but in a way, it wasn't entirely untrue. She did enter something new that summer. Not a school or a scholarship, but a wilderness of uncertainty, of silence, of self-redefinition. She left behind a world that expected answers. What she gave, instead, was a story that refuses to resolve neatly. A story still unfolding, one wave at a time, somewhere far beyond the shore.